Can you summarize why the West has become fearful of Islam and Muslims? Why does this image exist?
Number one, because we are living in a world where there are a great deal of injustices done to Muslims in various parts of the world, like Palestine and other places. And some of those injustices continued unabated, not for a year or two, but for a long period of time, decades in some cases. In a world where the big powers should have used their moral authority, in fact, to try to restrain the aggressors against Muslims' rights, dignity, and property, but instead, in fact, they have been supporting them. So at least this is the way it's perceived in the Muslim world. We know from history that it is during periods of social, economic, and political turmoil that some extreme ideas emerge. Whether those ideas really are based on Islam or not, this is a very important question, as people often mix between actions of Muslims and Islam in terms of its normative teachings. The normative teachings of Islam that is binding on all Muslims are derived from correct, quote-unquote, correct contextual interpretation of the Quran and the teaching of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, whereas opinions are subject to debate, and actions of Muslims even is something that is not definitive indication of Islam any more than the action of Christians or Jews is always consistent with the teaching of their faith. And we know that not only Muslims, but people of all faith communities are not perfect if you look at them in terms of history of centuries. This is the biggest mix. But what I'm saying basically is that it is in the context of that turmoil that among various faith communities, extremist ideas, sometimes violent ideas, may emerge without necessarily having a good grounding in the scriptures, or more seriously, when people twist the meaning of the scriptures, either because of ignorance or agendas or combination of these to justify their particular actions. Secondly, of course, the turmoil that we have in the world today is actually getting us into a vicious cycle, because sometimes that violence or inappropriate behavior on the part of some is responded to by violence, and the violence begets violence, and unfortunately we seem to be caught in this vicious circle of violence and counter-violence and counter-counter violence. I think what we need to do is cool-minded approach to try to analyze the reason behind this radicalization, maybe to be courageous enough and have the political will, not just religious or spiritual, political will, to try to mitigate those injustices that have contributed in the first place to these acts of violence. Most of the things that we hear about today are really relatively recent years, or at most recent decades. So I think once we deal with the problem at the roots, restore justice, the opportunity for radicalization that caused all that fear of Islam might be abated. On the other hand, also the media stereotypes and images and focus always on the negative, which by the way is part of the media's business, and business has to sell, and they cannot sell what the Good Samaritan did last night, but always sensational things take disproportionate exposure in the media, let alone the legacy of anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, anti-Islam kind of thing that existed in the Western world. Also contribute and reinforce this, especially people who come or pose as experts of Islam and try to discover the connection, quote-unquote, between some violent actions and the teaching of the Quran based on very poor exegesis, if not outright distortion. These are a variety of factors. But I must say, and for the sake of honesty also, that yes, some action of some people who claim to be Muslims sometimes reinforces this kind of image of fear. So there are a number of factors, both internal and external.